In today's 2026 Watch, we are continuing our coverage of congressional races across the state of Illinois. Today, I am joined by candidate for the 17th district in Illinois, Montez Soliz. Montez, thank you so much for joining us here on the Ishan S Show today for our 2026 Watch to talk about your race for Congress.
Thank you so much, Ishan. I appreciate you and the work that you're doing, and I'm so happy to be here.
It's great to have you on. Now, before we get into our discussion about the race for Congress, why don't you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself to my audience?
Amazing. Thank you again so much. My name is Montez Soliz. I'm running to represent the 17th Congressional District, which covers Rockford, but all the way up north to the Quad Cities and all the way down south to Bloomington, Normal, and Peoria. But a little bit about me. I'm the oldest of 9 siblings. Yes, 9. So sometimes I feel like I have to be Superman and Batman all at the same time. But I was also born into a working class, single family household where at the very beginning of my life, it was just me and my mom. She had me when she was a high school student. And at the time, she was told by many people that she would not graduate high school and that our lives would forever be defined by struggle. But she proved them wrong. Walking across that graduation stage with her diploma in one hand and me in the other. And of all the lessons that she's taught me, one of the main ones has been to fight for your future. And so I've taken that purpose and really fought all the way through middle school and high school. Another civic activist of mine that's been very inspirational is my grandfather, Philip Jackson. He had a nonprofit called the Black Star Project that focused on elevating Black and Brown voices voices, but also their education rates and graduation rates, and after graduation, providing stability when it came to jobs. And so, for me, since I was 12 years old, I've always been civically active and engaged in politics. I would say through him, whether it's protesting one day on Michigan Avenue or trying to have a mentorship program that's a youth-led, addressing students' concerns. But another component was addressing gun violence, as we know has been plaguing this nation for many decades, many more before you and I were even born, and continues to be a systematic issue. And so it was a host, I would say, of issues that really inspired me. He always taught me to stand up for what's right and for fight for someone else if they can't fight for themselves. And so shortly after he had passed away, I knew that I wanted to keep that commitment and standing up for what's right, even if it meant standing alone. So all throughout middle school and high school, I was actively engaged in politics. I was the student liaison between our student class and our faculty. I was class president in 2019. And then when I graduated from NIU, go Huskies, class of 2023, I served as director of governmental affairs, where I oversaw higher education bills that impacted the institutions. After graduation, I was blessed to have the opportunity to intern for 2 state representatives. Shortly after that, I was blessed to go to D.C. working for a congressperson, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood of Illinois' 14th Congressional District, where I served as her scheduler, then promoted to office manager and legislative correspondent. But shortly after the second Trump administration, I knew that we needed leaders right back home. And I like to say there's nothing like Midwest hospitality, so I was really glad to be back home. But I knew that we need leaders that are proactive and not reactive. Leaders that are ready to take a stand and not be complicit to what's going on. And that goes not only just for Republicans, but for Democrats as well. And so I am going up against a Democrat within my own party, but we are not running the same kind of campaign. I'm not just only going to be showing up during an election year when I believe it's important that we show up in our communities and in Congress, not just, in our communities and in our culture and not just in Congress. My apologies. And so my platform, what some would consider progressive, I consider fundamental and increasing it to inflation as progressive. I consider it foundational. Some would consider a streamlining immigration approach that we know we need in this time, in this moment, as progressive. I consider it as necessary. When it comes to capping childcare costs at no more than 7% of a family's income, I see that as necessary. Proudly championing the Medicare for all approach, or the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal in particular is a piece of legislation that Mr. Sorensen has said time and time again is unlikely to work. Some would consider progressive increasing teacher pay from $40,000 to $60,000 as progressive. I consider it necessary for those teachers, and so I my platform has always been about fighting for our future. Fighting for the next generation of leadership, but most importantly, fighting for our tomorrow. Because for so many families, they do not know what their tomorrow looks like, and so I'm ready to take a fight, and I'm so glad to be part of something bigger than myself.
Well, thank you for that. And you mentioned your race. You mentioned a lot of different issues that have come up in the campaign. But when you do take a survey, when you're out knocking on doors, for example, in the 17th, and you're going to community events and talking to residents, what are the biggest issues that you are hearing folks in the 17th talking about?
That's a great question. We're talking to that mom that's working 2, 3 jobs, that is trying to figure out how she's going to be able to put food on the table. And with this 23rd day of the government shutdown, many families all throughout this district and throughout this nation are having to have that discussion about how they're going to pay, for food and still keep the lights on. When we are going through a time where inflation is at an all-time high, not just grocery prices, but inflation prices. I mean, in gas prices, it's inflating everything. And so the other issue, though, is affordable housing. That's also an all-time rise. No person can afford a 2-bed, 1-bath unit off of one income anymore. And so there's 28% of people within our district that are spending more than 30% of their income just to keep the lights on and to pay their mortgage. And so it's issues like, affordability, healthcare, infrastructure, and outright immigration reform that we are currently seeing take place through this Trump administration. There are many families in Rockford and all throughout the district, in Peoria, in the Quad Cities, immigrant families that are worried that they too could fall victim to this administration. And so we're having those very intense conversations and figuring out how we can be part of that support.
So I like to say that this year is the year of the challenger. You are not the first. We've had a few folks challenging incumbents on the show already, and it's been very interesting getting to listen to what that experience looks like, and what it is that you are sometimes up against, which is in many cases a very complicated operation. So how would you say your experience has been running in this primary? Is it hard? Is it simpler than you thought?
Yeah.
And how do you explain to folks why their incumbent Democrat right now is not the perfect fit for this moment?
That's a great question. For me, I'm going to be honest with you. It was not easy, and it's still not easy. As a grassroots campaign, we're accepting all small grassroots donations. A lot of that is through social media or word of mouth. We're not receiving 200,000, nor would we ever receive any money. Money from APAC. $200,000 plus is what Eric Sorensen has currently received, and it's growing every day. Nor do I have $1 million donor list like Mr. Sorensen. So of course, when we talk about fundraising, that can be difficult. But what keeps me up and keeps me going is the conversations that we're having, not just with Democrats, not just Republicans, but with independents. People that feel as though politics is happening at them and not with them, and they're really being vulnerable about their issues and their concerns. They're fearing what even their tomorrow could look like, and they want representatives to have a seat at the table that reflect their values, that know what it's like to stretch a paycheck or ration medication or bury a dream because rent comes first. People are upset that they don't have a seat at the table. And we understand that when we don't have a seat at the table, we're on the menu. And so whether that be, education equity, immigration reform, healthcare infrastructure, agriculture that we know is important in this district. We have number one in soybean production and number two when it comes to corn production. These are issues that people are facing every day. These are the daily realities that don't make the headlines. unfortunately. Um, and so I always give this analogy when I'm talking to a hesitant voter about supporting someone else. I say you don't go to a car dealership and you're given one car option to choose from. You don't go to a restaurant and they say this is the one entree you can pick. So why is it any different when it comes to a primary? A primary is meant to bring forth the best ideas from all walks of life, and it should be the people of the 17th, not any um, you know lobbying firms or special interest groups donating millions of dollars into someone to prop up a candidate, but it should be the people that make that decision. And the people will make that decision on March 17th, 2026. But when it comes to the differences between me and Sorensen, I would not have I would not have said yes on the Lake and Riley Act, like unfortunately Mr. Sorensen was one of the very few Democrats to support the Lake and Riley Act, which is a conservative piece of legislation that now gives ICE even more power and enforcement to do what they're doing right now in broad daylight, kidnapping people, taking people and not asking questions, not asking for any proof or just outright being complicit. And we've got an administration, we've got leaders, unfortunately, even within our own party, as we just stated, that rather side with this administration than with the people, and that's unfortunate. But even more so, he in June of this year signed a resolution thanking ICE for quote unquote their contributions to the district. I don't know about you, but I don't know the last time ICE has ever provided any sort of contributions anywhere other than fear mongering, divisiveness, and again, as I just stated, outright broad daylight kidnapping. Um, this is someone else, though, that also uh, said yes in supporting Charlie Kirk having a day, honoring his legacy. It's one thing to honor an individual and a person, and the horrific act that happened to Mr. Kirk should never have happened to anyone. Period. Because political violence should not be condoned. But it's one thing to honor a human being; it's another to honor their legacy. And there are many people in the district that are upset with that most recent vote. This is someone that also claims to be the only meteorologist in Congress, and yet when it comes to a comprehensive approach, when it comes to climate change, we are not seeing that from Mr. Sorensen, time and time again. And so that's been the repetitiveness: is that he's only showing up when it's convenient. He's only blaming leadership for the reason why in which he voted, and so he's going to continue being who he is, and we're going to continue calling it out for what it is.
Interesting stuff. So one of the big questions that we've been talking about, and you mentioned some legislation, I want to talk about one particular piece of legislation that has been on top of everyone's mind for a few months now, which is what I like to call the big ugly bill, which, as a reminder, takes 17 million Americans off of their health care, robs children of free school lunches, takes 4 million veterans and seniors off of food assistance, and a lot more. So much. So something I've been asking candidates who've been coming on this show is to talk about a specific thing in the big ugly bill that us folks are not paying attention to so much in the media, or stuff that's not necessarily being highlighted in the bill. Is there anything in particular that you've been keeping track of that that more of us should know about?
Well, just to add on to when it comes to our veterans, we're talking to veterans that are now concerned, particularly because we are in the 17th has a major parts that are rural, and so we've got veterans that are now trying to book, mental health appointments, medical appointments that are having to wait 2-3 months more, and having to, turn to alternatives. Going to Chicago and driving hundreds of miles just to get basic healthcare necessities. That's a problem that we, just as Americans, need to resolve. They have served in our country, and it's our time that we serve them here back at home. And so really just highlighting our veteran population, as it is an increased population in our district. But homelessness, when it comes to our veterans, is also big in our district. And this, what you say big ugly bill, I call a big bag of BS. It is harming, our veterans. It's harming our small businesses, and again, it's harming 17 million people being impacted by being cut from Medicare and Medicaid. I'm a numbers person, so that's 1 in 4 in our district. That's 1 in 2 children. Again, I'm the oldest of 9. All of my siblings are on some form of government-based healthcare plan, because we know that healthcare should be a right and not a privilege. That's why I'm so proud to champion a Medicare for all approach, because had we have had such an approach like such that's passed in law, we would not be undergoing what we are currently experiencing again through the 23rd day of this government shutdown.
So you bring up that government shutdown. It is affecting a lot of people in a lot of different ways. As of right now, there are now concerns that SNAP benefits are not going to be renewed starting November 1st. And that is on top of everyone's mind as we are very concerned. If you are elected to Congress, if you win this primary and then are elected in November next year, you are going to be dealing with a Trump White House, a Republican White House, and chances are you might be dealing with at least some Republican control of Congress. So I feel like this first shutdown might not be the first one of the next 4 years. What is your approach? What do you think your approach will be to working with the folks and incumbents right now in the White House and really just working with Republicans in general in order to avoid this kind of hurt, if there is anything you think there might be room for working together on?
Right. We're seeing a lot of political theatrics. I experienced this when I was a staffer out in DC. People
Mm-hmm.
put on a show in front of the camera, and then behind the scenes, they do want to work together. And I'm not saying that everyone is politically motivated. I mean, has political theatrics in their blood, but there are a number of both Democrats and Republicans that can have a seat at the table, even if it looks on the media that they're on opposing sides. It starts with understanding their values, but not caving into your own, not compromising why you were put into this position. Because we have to be reminded the same way that we were put into this position is the same way we can be voted out.
Yeah.
And so really, I believe it is important to reach across the aisle. We should not live in a country where we agree on everything. That is what Donald Trump wants, is to just for him to say something and us to just fully agree with. That is outright a dictatorship. So there should be a civil discourse. But it starts with having new perspectives at the table. And that's why I believe, not only just my campaign, but we're seeing other Gen Z candidates across this nation that are also running, where we know Congress currently represents less than 1% of Gen Z. And so that's a problem that I'm hoping we fix. And if not my race, then, motivate someone else to, of course, run as well. But we have to find that compromise. We have to reach across the aisle and say what can be done. But we cannot compromise our own values. And so we have to continue to fight. Being at the No Kings protest, if it showed anything, is that when we are one, we are unified, and that there are more of us than there are of them. And we are the ones that give them the power. The Constitution starts with we the people. We the people right now are demanding that Donald Trump and this, authoritarian regime should not be for the 1% and the ultra wealthy. We've seen this through this big ugly bill, which is now transferred to, the number one largest wealth in
Yeah.
this nation, where we're seeing, again, 17 million people being impacted by Medicare, Medicaid cuts. We're seeing veterans having to now book these appointments months later, and immigrant families that are now falling victim. It's immigrant families one day, but it could be you or I the next. And so this is an administration that told us what he was going to do through this Project 2025, all 908 pages of it. And so we are finally realizing what that means, or the people that voted for him are finally realizing, rather, what that means and how it's impacting them. And unfortunately, we are seeing that even through SNAP benefits being cut. I personally, at the very beginning of my life, my family survived on these social programs that I know so many other families rely on even today. And it breaks my heart having to now have these serious conversations with food pantries on how we can be there for our constituents. We always should be, but now we are scared and having to go into overdrive about how many thousands of families are going to be impacted, even within our district.
It's absolutely devastating, and it's just shocking just how the level of inhumanity that goes into these types of decisions just like this. And I think it's contingent on so many people to be pushing back. And so when I think about, after the 2026 midterms, if Democrats across the country are, perform phenomenally well and they could take control of maybe the House and the Senate, there's going to be a lot of work to do. And I am assuming that not everyone is going to be working on the same priorities. I mean, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I'm guessing people will have their different goals if they are elected and they are there. So let's put you in that position. You're sitting in the halls of Congress 2027 January. What is your day one priority and what is your 100-day priority?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never been asked that. For me, day one priority depends on what the constituents want for that day. I know we're hearing again, not to sound like a broken record, um, issues when it comes to affordable housing. So I'd love to, on day one, um, introduce a piece of legislation that repeals the Faircloth Amendment, which puts a cap on how many federal housing units are able to go um, to public housing authorities to make that
Mm.
decision on how much those affordable houses will be at. Whether it's education equity, increasing teacher pay, again, introducing a piece of legislation to increase teacher pay from 40,000 to 60,000. Reintroducing the Green New Deal, which absolutely should be passed, providing clean, renewable energy jobs to the Midwest just as much as any other blue state is important. Having a much more streamlined approach and safeguard protections for our immigrant families and our DACA recipients. By day 100, I'm hoping that of the 10 pieces of legislation that we have that I've introduced that are ready on day one and not just one day, it's my goal that half, if not more, are passed. But even after, we will still be fighting for our future because that's what's important at the end of the day.
Well, Montez, that is a very ambitious agenda, and I'm very intrigued to hear a lot of the different policy priorities. And it's been very nice listening to these goals because these are real legitimate goals. And I really liked how you framed it at the very start when you said that it's not progressive priorities. These are just necessary priorities because a lot of them are. A lot of them are necessary priorities. I mean, we call something crazy radical, but it's really just normal. And it's what normal people are asking for. So it's good to see the work and the message being pushed out there. But we are unfortunately running out of time for our interview here. I wish we could have so much more. I feel like we'd have a billion things to talk
You'll have
about.
to bring me back. Yeah.
I really do think so. But before I do let you go, are there any parting thoughts you'd like to share with my audience?
Well, again, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me this platform and this time to be able to, talk. I'm a political nerd at heart, and so we could truly
Me
talk
too.
for hours and hours. And I just want to say thank you. But again, the people have a choice. They always have a choice. And we, as the generation, as Gen Z, have lived through active shooter drills. The generation where climate change is now an existential crisis. The generation where now we do not have affordable housing options, where Social Security could be cut within the next 30 years. Where more immigrant families could be impacted. As an immigrant family of my own, we immigrated from Guanajuato, Mexico, and so I'm a proud Afro Latino. Uh, I I refuse to just be complicit and just be silenced. When I first launched the campaign, there were people within my own party that were saying, you're too young. Colleagues don't run against colleagues. You need to wait your time. You need to wait your turn. And to that, I say, in the communities that I was born and raised in, we've waited our time for far too long. And if we're not fighting for our future, then who the hell will? And it's time that we have we grow we we grow a spine, I should say, and actually be there for each other, for our neighbors, for our families and for our friends. Um, and as a big brother, I'm going to be fighting for my siblings' future, a future that's worth living and not just existing or surviving. And so that's what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for something that's truly bigger than myself.
Montez Soliz, candidate for Illinois 17. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yes, I would love to have you back on for an update on the campaign. Let's get you back on real soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Perfect. All right.